Welcome to the Open Forum on Research Assessment Exercise 2026 Assessment Criteria. We are delighted to have you all here to discuss matters pertaining to the upcoming RAE. I'm Joyce from the UGC Secretariat. Today's program will include an open plenary session to be followed by 4 concurrent breakout sessions at nearby lecture theatres. We'll then come back here for a closing plenary. I'll talk about the arrangements later. Before we begin, may I first invite Professor Chris Brink, convener of the UGC RAE Group, Professor Timothy Tong, chairman of the Research Grants Council, and deputy convener of the RAE Group, Professor James Tang, Secretary General of the UGC, and Professor David Price, RAE consultant, to proceed to the stage. Professors, please. May I now invite Professor Chris Brink to give the opening remarks. Professor Brink, thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and privilege to open this forum for discussing the assessment criteria of the RAE 2026. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do so and to see all this wonderful turnout. I know we have a few university presidents here present, vice presidents, all sorts of important people from the university, and of course the academics, which is the heartland of what we do. So welcome to all of you. There are also some people on the screen, online, virtual. And amongst those, I just want to mention one name, and that is Professor Sir Anton Mascatelli, who couldn't join us in person, and he is the chair of the research group. So all of this happens under the auspices of the UGC. The UGC has a research committee, a standing committee. That's Professor Mascatelli is the chair of that, and then that research committee has a working group. That's the Research Assessment Group, of which I'm the convener. So that's the structure. As you may know, the moment the previous RAE ended, we started work on the next one. So we've been engaged with this exercise already for the past 2 years. And we have made some progress on the documentation. Some of it is already on the website of the UGC. I'll say a few words about that in a moment. But my main job this afternoon is to introduce some of the people who participate in the assessment. This is a research assessment exercise, so it's a peer review exercise. And for that, as you may know, we constitute panels. We have 13 of these panels. And I'm very pleased to welcome the conveners and the deputy conveners of those panels here today. And I think it's important that they show their faces, so to speak. So I'm going to invite them panel by panel just to stand up and turn around and take a bow, so to speak, so that you can see who is leading the actual assessment exercise. And I'll do that in the order in which the panels are listed in all the documentation. So we begin with B for biology. We have the convener, Professor Paola Pedarzani, and the deputy convener, Professor Karen Halliday. That's the two of them. There they are. Next up, the Health Sciences panel. It's Professor Ian Hall, convener, and Professor Jane Burridge, deputy convener. That's them. By coincidence of circumstances, we don't actually have a physical presence here for the Physical Sciences panel, which is panel number 3. Something to do with aeroplanes and delays. Professor Paget, Miles Paget, is the convener of the physical sciences panel. Some of you who participated in RAE 2020 might remember him because he was also the convener then. He is in an aeroplane in the sky somewhere as we speak. And his deputy convener is Professor Grady, Monica Grady. She's on Zoom somewhere. There she is. So say hello to. Thank you for joining us virtually, Monica. The EEE panel, Electrical and Electronic Engineering, the convener, Professor Deepak Uttamtanjani, and the deputy, Professor Tim Green. There's the two of them, the electrical engineers. The computer science and IT panel, Professor David Rosenblum and Professor Linda Hardman. That's them. Thank you. The general engineering panel, Professor Bernard Horn and Professor Diane Wiley. There they are. Now I'm beginning to lose track here. What comes after general engineering? It's, remind me? Built environment, thank you very much. The built environment panel is Professor Cecilia Wong and Professor Tony Thorpe. Here we are. The law panel, Professor Ian McNeil and Professor Andrea Björklund. That's the two of them. Business and economics and various other subjects, Professor Raghavendra Rao, he says Raghu will do for him. And the deputy is Professor Mo Wang. Social sciences panel, panel 10, Professor John Carpenter and Professor Jenny Yend. The humanities panel, Professor Li Wai Yi, is the convener, and Professor Michelle Sheehan, deputy convener. That's the two of them. Panel 12 is creative and performing arts and design. It's Professor Maria Delgado and Professor Mark Dinverno. And finally, the education panel, panel 13, Professor Li Wei and Professor Lorraine Kale. So, can I immediately, on behalf of the RAEG and the UGC, say thank you to these people because they are going to be doing an awful lot of work between now and 2026. So thank you very much to them. I think I should also introduce the people on the working group. I'll begin with the top table here. Professor Tim Tong here is the deputy convener of the RAEG, and he is also the convener of the Research Grants Council, which, as you know, is the other main funding line of the UGC. And he happens to be the immediate past president of this university. So, Tim, I don't know whether I'm allowed to welcome you because this used to be your territory. So, anyway, but welcome on the panel. Then we have Professor James Tang is the Secretary General of the UGC. So he's got plenty on his plate. And Professor David Price here with the blue jacket, that's our consultant. So he is our expert on various technical matters. In the front row, we have some more. There are external members and internal members of the RAEG. The external members clearly are from outside Hong Kong, and the internal members are from the local universities. So the other external members, besides myself and David, Professor Phil Gummett. Phil? That's him. Phil was the consultant last time in the RAE 2020, and Professor Arno de Meyer, who is the immediate past president of Singapore Management University. And I'm almost done, but I do not want to neglect the local members. So we have local members from Hong Kong University, Professor Kendall Johnson. Kendall, hello. From HKBU, Professor Gina Lai. from PolyU, this university, Professor Wong Wing Tak is there, over there. And finally, but by no means least, Professor T.C. Pong over there. He is a very important person because he is in charge of the electronic submission system. So when you make your submission, you have this wonderful electronic system, and TC is our expert in charge of that. So those are my introductions, and thank you for bearing with me. What we're going to do this afternoon is, this is a listening exercise. We want to hear, we have produced documents, some are final, some are in draft. At this stage, we want your questions, we want your comments, we want you to raise any issues that you may feel have not yet been covered. All of that will happen in the 4 breakout sessions, which our master or mistress of ceremonies will explain to you shortly. And the feedback that you give today, the questions that you raise, the issues that you raise, that will feed into the finalization of the last 2 documents, which are the guidelines for the panels whose conveners are here. And there's 2 sets of guidelines. The general panel guidelines are applicable to all the panels. They exist in draft already. In fact, it's on the website, I believe, the draft form. But we delayed signing off on those general panel guidelines until we've had your feedback, which will happen today. And the final set of documents of the 4 is the panel-specific guidelines. Every panel will, within the context of the general panel guidelines, will draw up its own set of more specific guidelines related to its own suite of disciplines. And again, for them, that process has already started, but with today's feedback, the people I've introduced will be able to finalize their draft panel-specific guidelines. That will then feed back to our consultant, Professor Price. It will be considered again, and we hope to sign off on all of these documents by September, which is the next meeting of the suite of meetings of the UGC. So this is an important session, an important day for us to make sure that we have consulted as widely as possible on finalizing these documents. What we're going to do is not to try and give you definitive answers today to any questions that you might wish to raise. We will absorb all of those questions, and there will be also by September a set of answers. So the usual Q&As, the questions and answers set, we will, if there is a question we can answer confidently today, we will do so, but that's not the aim of the exercise. The aim of the exercise is to get your feedback, and there will be a document on all these questions with their respective answers finalized by September, again, the September meeting of the UGC. And I think those go on the website as well. It's another set of the RAE documents. So that's essentially the process for today and from now on. And I look forward to good discussions. The breakout sessions after these general introductions, that's where you really engage with the RAE topic. And the facilitators, there is one of our panel conveners is a facilitator at each of those breakout sessions. You will soon hear and see who they are. And they will take notes about all the issues you raise. And after the breakout session here on stage, they will come and give their feedback for the moment, and then that again feeds into the Q&A document. So can I conclude by saying thank you again for the interest you show in this exercise by turning up today. That concludes my remarks, and I will now call on Professor Tong to make a few remarks. Tim, thank you very much. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good to see all of you here. Today's gathering is important. because it's part of the preparation for the upcoming RAE 2026. After this opening session, we will break up into 4 different groups based on disciplines, as you heard earlier. And I would encourage you to express your views if you have any concerns about the exercise or any aspect of how things are planned. It is important that we hear your opinions. As Professor Chris Brink mentioned, what you express to us after we hear your comments will in some way be reflected in the final drafts of the document. One thing I'd like to share with you is that the first time RAE was conducted was in 1993. And as the past president of Hong Kong Poly U, I can attest to the fact that the RAE exercise does change how we do things at the university. For one thing, I think the RAE catalyzes changes reflecting what the local community expects from us. For example, nowadays, when we talk about research, it's not just research excellence that we are pursuing. It is also impact to the community that we like to encourage our colleagues to take an extra step to translate the results of their research into practical use for the community. Now, the word impact over time has actually expanded. During the days when I started as an assistant professor, impact mostly meant that whether I could publish my research results in good journals and whether my research would end up getting cited by others and better used by others to build upon the research in the field. But nowadays, the word impact has a broader meaning. It also includes whether the results will be translated into practical use, whether it is a product, a hardware, a piece of hardware that people use, or whether it's a piece of software people use, or whether it is simply a methodology that people will end up using in the way that they do things. So, and that's why nowadays we like to also introduce impact stories that you will be submitting, okay? And I'd like to share with you the relationship between RGC and the research assessment exercise. RGC each year provides about $2.5 billion, or at least in the last fiscal year, 23/24, the amount of funding that went from RGC to the university was about $2.5 billion, Hong Kong dollars. But the total funding for research at all the universities summed up was about 3 times that, okay? $7.5 billion. So where did the extra $5 billion come from? It came through the research block of the block grant to the universities, okay? But the relationship is such that the success of your professors in competing for grants through RGC will actually in some way affect the R block that the university will be receiving. So there's a relationship there. And the RAE exercise also, depending on the outcomes that will be revealed, in some way it also affects the funding that the university will be receiving. So RGC provides the funding. Through UGC, you get the block grants in which there is a block of money designated to support research, and RAE comes and assess the work that you all produced. That's a circle, okay? And it is in that, what I mentioned, that we help to actually mold the culture of the research enterprise in Hong Kong, okay? And if anything, I hope that you all feel that the research funding from the local government is very serious, and it was increased in 23-24 compared to the previous year. It increased by about 11%. So I think with that in mind, this RAE exercise, what will be reviewed, would be very useful in our effort to continue to support our researchers. And so I would encourage all of you to be active in this exercise, and in the breakout sessions, please feel free to ask questions, and we look forward to be collecting your input. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tong. May I now invite Professor James Tang to give an overview on RAE 2026. Professor Tang, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to join Chris and Timothy to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. I can see familiar faces, and some of our university leaders are here, as well as some of our best and brightest academic researchers are all gathering here in Hong Kong. Also, special appreciation to our conveners and deputy conveners. I was saying this morning that we have a remarkable gathering of brain power and deep experience who would guide us in this very important exercise for the Hong Kong research community. But I would say that it's not only about the Hong Kong research community. I think Hong Kong is globally linked, and this is really a major global collaboration in looking at research in Hong Kong and all the collaborative work that we've been doing with the rest of the world. Now, what I'm going to do today is really to walk you through quickly with what we call a brief overview of the research assessment exercise. I know that some of you are familiar, some of you had a lot of experiences in RAE, and this information is available in various journals communicated to the universities and also on our website. But I think it would be still useful for us to focus a bit with this overview, so we can, for the rest of your discussions, I think we would have some kind of a reference. So what I'm going to do would be to go through some slides. So I have about a dozen or so slides, and I'm afraid I probably have to mindful of the time to go through them relatively quickly. But I'm sure you know most of this, but just let's have a quick walkover. Objectives, we were told about the importance of the funding, but it actually serves not only for funding purposes, it does help us in assessing the university's performance with international standards. It had helped, I think Tim was alluding to the history of the RAE, and I think it helped Hong Kong in promoting research excellence. And then it would help the universities in thinking about their own research strategies moving forward. So it was beneficial in terms of driving research excellence for the sector as a whole. Now, you all know that we have the assessment elements, RO, RI, RN, and we have made some slight adjustment to the assessment elements for 2026. RO would be reduced from 70% to 65%. impact moving up from 15 to 20, and then the RN is staying at 15%. This is a bit more conservative than the REF in the UK, but I think for Hong Kong, this is probably the right balance for our own research community. I think you know this assessment period, census date, 30th of September 2025, and 6 years of research output, impact and environment. For impact, the underpinning research would be, the date for the underpinning research would be covered from the 1st of January 2006 to the census date of 30th September 2025. If you're still not aware of it, I think we're in big trouble, but I'm sure you know all about that. Okay, now assessment panels, 13, and then 41 UOAs. So we have about 400 panel members. This is an increase of 10%. We do have more, I think, faculty members who are eligible this time around. So we are going to have more submissions. And then, so we are increasing the number of our panel membership. And the local participation is increased to 35%. So we have a slightly reduced international membership at about 65%. But the total number, actually, of our overseas members is actually increasing. And then something I think Chris is very proud of, we have a 50% male and female balance for our conveners and deputy conveners. Now, we have academic members, we have lay members. Lay members are primarily responsible for assessing impact cases. And then we could, of course, engage external reviewers and impact assessors. Eligibility, again, I'm quite sure you're familiar with this. What we call non-eligible staff could be included in the IM and EN elements. Research output, there's some specifics depending on when our academic staff are being employed by the universities, whether you have to submit 3 or 4 or 2 or 4 and 4, I think these are all clearly spelled out. Research impact is submitted on a UOA basis. Impact cases, what we call ICS, would have to be underpinned by research undertaken and supported by the submitting university. EN, we have much debate about EN. I think that's the same in the UK in this case. So we have specific requirement for submitting of an overview statement at the university level, and then also the UOA level. I think this helped to cut down some of the paperwork and number of submissions. Other highlights. This is something we discussed a lot, continued impact case studies. I think that would be an opportunity to further elaborate on some of those, but basically concern is about overlap, and so it has to be distinctively sort of beyond those who were submitted in 2020. Now, something you all are familiar with, the qualitative definitions of our 5-point scale from basically unclassified to 4-star. In the previous round of our RAE, I think Hong Kong has done extremely well with 4 and 3 stars performances. This year, we hopefully would see even better results. We are going to announce the results in the form of overall quality profiles and sub-profiles of individual elements of assessment by UOA and by panel at university level, as well as sector-wide. We will provide sector-wide comments by our panels, very dedicated panel members who are working very hard for this exercise, and then the RO data, IM, EN submissions by UOA and by university. So the assessment results, when we announced it, some of these results at research area level will only be communicated to the universities under confidential cover, and then the panel comments will also be communicated to each of the universities. So the panel, after concluding the assessment exercise, will also compile reports on the exact assessment and the issues arising, or the strengths and the limitations of the performances assessed for this particular exercise. Now, finally, the roadmap. Again, I think you would know the roadmap, but this is just to recapture that. In September 2024, we had the announcement of the general panel guidelines and panel-specific guidelines. And then the summer of 2025, the universities will have to submit their exemption requests. And then our census date on 30th September 2025. By the end of next year, or mid-December, submissions by the universities, and we'll run a trial assessment. We did that last round, and we were lucky to have been able to conclude that before COVID hit globally. And then we switched to online assessment. This time around, I think we're going to be able to do physical assessment. So we have the formal assessment, individual assessment, from March to July, and then we are going to bring all our panels to Hong Kong to do the assessment in person, and then we have the panel feedback reports by towards the end of 2026, and then the big date would be results announcement in January 2027. So this concludes my presentation, and I cannot emphasize more how important this particular meeting is going to be, because the panel members, panel conveners and deputy conveners are all here, our RAEG is all here. So we really look forward to have your input and your comments, and we will value your frank input to this particular exercise at this stage of RAE 2026. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Tang. May I now invite Professor David Price to give an overview on the RAE 2026 assessment criteria. Professor Price, please.
So Hong Kong is rightly recognized internationally as a center of research excellence, and one way of maintaining and continuing that is to undergo this research assessment process on a regular basis. So the review, which is going to happen over the next couple of years, will be carried out by an internationally recognized group of experts drawn from around the world, including from Hong Kong. And they will use the highest standards against which to judge the work being done in the Hong Kong universities. As we've heard, there will be 13 panels that will be looking at selected research outputs, submitted impact case studies, and the research environment in the various units of assessment. There are already a number of documents in the public domain for you to consult. There is the framework document and the guidance notes, which have been announced and published earlier this year. The general panel guideline, I think Chris already mentioned, is in draft and is on the website, and I will refer to that in what I speak about now. But it's the panel-specific guidelines, which is the focus of what's going to be refined over the next few weeks, and that this meeting will be able to have a significant input into. So this the RAE process is very much your process, and you should have ownership, if you like, of the processes which are going on. So the research outputs, be they academic papers or other sorts of research outputs, will be assessed.
details of which are in the general panel guide notes, paragraph 15. And the criteria that will be looked for is the creation of new insight or new information, the continuing rise of scholarship, and the growth of knowledge as a result of that, and that they will be necessarily publicly available. The panels are currently working on, and you will be discussing that with them today, what sorts of outputs are eligible. Obviously, the medical community have different traditional outputs, say, than the performing arts, and so one needs to define quite what's going to be appropriate. The criteria for this is to look at the originality of the work, the significance of the work, and the rigor. And again, these terms are defined in the General Panel Guidelines, paragraph 19, and will be assessed against the highest international standards. And as a result of each piece of work being read by at least 2 members of the panel, and more if necessary, that it will be given a grade ranging from 4-star, corresponding to the world-leading research, through to 3-star, 2-star, 1-star, and some work may be considered to be inappropriate and be unclassified. It should be noted that the work will be read, and it's the matter of what's in the research, not where it's published, is the key thing. Also, although some panels may look at citations characteristics for supporting their views, it is not a driver in any of the assessment and is a secondary source of information. So not all panels will use citation characteristics. Again, this is one of the things that panels are considering. In assessing the impact of the work, the impact case studies which are submitted, they'll be assessed by looking at the range and reach and significance of the impacts. There's a wide range of impact in academic research. It's not just creation of wealth, economic growth, and creation of technology. It represents also the impact on public policy, public engagement, professional practice, social environment. So there are many ways of research creating an impact, and they will all be considered and assessed as positive outcomes. The panels are currently going to be working on examples of impact in the different disciplines, and they will be available in the panel-specific guidelines. But again, your input into these areas will be welcome. The assessment of impact will look at the various types of impact, as I said, public engagement, public policy, etc. The way that the guidelines, the general guidelines discuss impact is in terms of reach and significance, and that's discussed and defined in paragraph 53 of the guidelines. And again, the panels will look at each impact case study on the round, and it will be given a 4-star to unclassified mark, and will be read by, if not the entire panel, then a significant subset of that panel. The environment statement is a very important part of this exercise. Each institution will be writing an environment statement, as well as the unit of assessment, and the areas of consideration will be the research and impact strategy that the unit of assessment has adopted, how that is being implemented and how it's achieved. There's also, which is something new in this process, the request to indicate how the institution and the unit is looking at and addressing issues related to research integrity and research ethics, and this is becoming an increasingly important international concern and consideration. In addition to that, the environment will be looking at how the people, the staff, and the student research students are helped in the university, how their career is developed and nurtured, and whether or not equal opportunities and diversity issues are being appropriately addressed. There are also an opportunity for institutions to talk about the research grant income, the infrastructure and the facilities which are available at the institution, outline their collaboration strategy and policy, highlight the esteem with which colleagues are held in the institution, and to indicate how the unit of assessment is contributing to the discipline and well-being of the research base. The criteria used in this assessment are the vitality of the research environment and its sustainability, and that's particularly relating to the sustainability of staff, career development, recruitment, and so forth. So those factors are what will be considered, and today is the opportunity to discuss those in your breakout groups and help the panel chairs and sub-chairs develop the final document, which will be produced later this summer. Thank you very much.
This session will be led by Professor Chris Brink, together with Professor Timothy Tong, Professor James Tang, Professor David Price, and the 4 facilitators in the breakout sessions. I'll now pass the time to Professor Brink. Thank you.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and can I immediately say thank you to everybody who stayed the course. It's a very impressive number of people who remain in the venue this late on a Monday afternoon, so thank you for that. And thank you for your inputs. This will be hugely helpful. I'll make some concluding remarks at the end, but the main purpose of this session is to get some feedback from our 4 facilitators in the 4 breakout groups, remembering that each group comprised 3 or even 4 different UOAs. And I'll do that in the same order as we've done it so far. So where is Paola? Once again, you are first, the biology panel, and the other panels in group 1, please.
So if I may echo, Chris, thank you very much for your participation, the questions, the suggestions, and the feedback. These are very, very valuable for our work as we finalize the guidelines, the panel-specific guidelines for the biology and preclinical studies. Altogether, the questions were interesting. The questions concerning research outputs were mainly about different types of outputs, so how we would be dealing with short papers or with papers that are centered on topics that have a predominantly regional relevance, and therefore they might be published in journals that are more local compared with others. How we would be dealing with multiple authorships and with interdisciplinarity. And it was very good to hear your opinions about this. And I hope we reassured you that we have actually rather robust processes that deal with most of these issues. And they're already largely in place, but we will consider what we discussed as part of our session today. We had a discussion on patents being a research output that would be largely accepted by both, by all 3 panels that we covered in our session, so the physical sciences, the health sciences, and the biology and preclinical. We had a very interesting suggestion that I have already brought to the attention of the UGC about the potential creation of a new unit of assessment, which, if it happens, it will happen for next RAE, which would split off agricultural, veterinary, and food sciences from the biology panel. And I trust that the UGC will judge the case and decide on the basis of their criteria and critical mass of scientists and so on. We discussed as potential research outputs that would be considered preprints to some extent and clarified how we will consider preprints. The message there is that preprints in repositories such as BioX Archive or MEDEX Archives, for instance, are normally not peer-reviewed, but we will consider them, and our work as a panel will effectively be the work referees would do on these papers. I'm trying to sweep through my notes. Okay, we briefly touched on the point if it would be important and useful to have a comment, a 100-word comment provided by the university on originality and significance for every single research output submitted. And I think on balance, the general opinion was that the disadvantages would outweigh the advantages of doing this, and most significantly, in the discussion, it came out that this might introduce biases. So as a panel, we will discuss this issue again, issue our guidelines on all three panels, but I think that the direction of travel came out quite clearly from the discussion, so thank you very much for that. We had a very quick touch on the potential use of AI in the assessment, which was perceived as a potentially unbiased way of assessing ROs. And I argued against the perception this would be unbiased, I'm afraid. I do not think this will be actually considered in the current guidelines for this RAE, but it might come out actually quite powerfully for next one. So the next RAE and the panels dealing with this type of topics will need to come up with consistent and solid guidelines in this sector. When it comes to impact, besides having an interesting discussion about the change in relative weighting of impact compared with research outputs and the fact that impact went slightly up for this RAE, we argued that actually this is not taking away the importance and value of not applied research, but it simply is a way to showcase fundamental research that has reached a stage or that because of its own nature can be applied, how well it is applied, and to present it to the public in a way that justifies the use of public resources to fund scientific research across the board. So it's a very important thing to do. Again, I'm trying to quickly go through. Okay, we discussed shortly the evidence for impact, whether qualitative versus quantitative evidence would be preferred or preferable. Well, this depends essentially on the type of impact case that you are submitted. At the end of the story, what the panel will assess will always be the quality of the evidence that you are provided, either qualitative or quantitative type of evidence. In addition, we encouraged all PIs submitting impact cases and universities selecting them to take into consideration examples that are available from the previous Hong Kong RAE and from the English ref. They might actually provide some useful additional guidelines. Okay, then we had a discussion on the so-called continued impact cases. So these are impact cases that in this exercise will build upon pre-existing ones that have been submitted in the 2020 RAE. And we made clear that actually the impact must be sort of made very clear. It must be made very clear that the impact of the continued case goes beyond the scope of the previous one. And this means it might add a new dimension to the sort of reach, or to the significance, or to both. But it cannot be just a linear incremental increase, like in the previous impact case. You presented a new prosthetic device that was applied to 2,000 patients, and now you're showing us the data concerning the next 2,000. It doesn't work in that way. It has to have some element of true novelty that goes beyond what was submitted in the previous case, and this will be part of the assessment. Okay, I think we briefly touched upon books and the possibility of having double-weighted inputs, although for our panels, actually, for health and for the biology panels, we hardly ever see books as research outputs being submitted, and it might not be easy to make a case for originality. And so these were the main things that we really discussed all together. But I think some clear concerns, trends emerged, and we will try and make our guidelines at the level of the three panels as clear as possible, so that we try and avoid ambiguity and guide everybody the best possible way to submit the best possible return.
Thank you, Paola. We'll go straight on and go through all four of the panels. So the next one up is engineering and computer science and I forget what, built environment. Thank you, Bernard.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We have a good and lively discussion during the breakaway session. And like the previous speakers, a lot of questions raised, that topics that discussed were common. That's not, I think that is not unexpected. So we look at the topics plus any other business related to the RAE. The first topic we looked at was the submission. The submission that were generally, the breakaway session was supportive of providing subdisciplinary information for the ROs. But it was felt that some guidelines from the RAE would be useful. So in setting up such information, and then we move on to research output. The research output, we have more discussion, but I will not go through each topic one by one. I will mainly just cover some of the more important ones. The first ones that we discuss about is the issue of short communications. Suppose there's a research output, it's only a few pages, versus a conventional, a standard size, a standard length journal papers. What's the view for that? And basically, we would take the guiding principle of the RAE. We would look at each RO and judge it by its originality, the rigor, and significance. And we would not really pay particular attention onto the length of a research output. Then we have a good and long discussion on this question on the issue of 100 words. And obviously there are some uses for these 100 words. But one member pointed out that there's pros and cons of these 100 words. And it's also pointed out that, this 100 words is not a set limit. Well, if you exceed 100 words to 105 words, 110 words, that's all right. But that's a minor issue. Then we talk about the use of metrics and citation, etc. And obviously that the the limitations of citation index, the citation numbers, etc., are well known. So we're very much aware of that. They are only used for supplementary information in assessment. The next topic we talked about was the research impact. And, well, we also touch upon this issue on continued impact case studies. So the main view is that, well, we need to look at the additionality aspect of the continued impact case studies. Obviously, we do not say that, well, this is not acceptable. So this is totally acceptable. Then we move on to research environment. The research environment, we look at the issue of the weighting of the individual elements, whether we should have the standard weighting, the same weighting across all 4 panels within the session 2, or we should have different weightings for different panels. And that was a topic that will be discussed by the individual panels. So it's an open issue. Then a very good point about the size effect. Some universities are large, or some UOA unit of assessment are large, and some are smaller. So how do we deal with that? So again, well, we could not say that, well, this is a algorithmic approach to look at the size of a UOA. There's some excellent work produced by a small unit of assessment, and it's not the issue saying that, well, the small UOA would be disadvantaged. There's no such question at all. Then finally, we look at any other issues. And one topic came up that was about the multiple authors. So multiple authors, in fact, is a very well-known issue. Some of them, we talk about a few authors, and some of them we talk about tens of authors, or even a very large number, as in physics. That is well covered by existing rule. So a consultant was able to deal with that question very easily. One more question is about what happened to the submission of research paper. That paper was actually conducted by the academic staff when he did the work before joining a university in Hong Kong. But the paper was published within the RAE period. What's the view for that? So the answer is very simple, that it's immaterial. We only look at the paper submitted by individual during the RAE period, and the whereabouts of the work was conducted was immaterial. So these are the main points that we discussed this afternoon, and that concludes my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. The group 3 is Law, Business and Economics and Social Sciences. John, Professor Carpenter.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we certainly talked about quite a lot of things in the meeting, although most of it was concerned with, just in terms of time, in terms of the research outputs. And what people were concerned about was certainly things that were technical, so clarifications as to how the process worked, how assessment took place, and I think behind that there was concern about, is this going to be fair? And indeed, in the discussion, some people were obviously thinking it's probably not going to be fair. But we began this bit of the exercise by the question raised about, well, what happens if you've got a department that's got a couple of Nobel Prize winners, or some people that are really real stars? Shouldn't they be allowed to submit more material than just the 4 that they're restricted to? Because that would, in a sense, enhance the reputation of the university as a whole and so on. I think it's important, and we stress this, that the focus is not on individuals. The focus is on the unit of assessment that is being assessed. And that another solution which might be to kind of add another top grade that would only be achievable by Nobel Prize winners and their ilk, that would be a solution. But again, that's not likely to work either. So I think generally it was raised as an interesting question that could be considered by the panel, sorry, not the panel, the RAEG, thank you, got it. That there was a question, was quite interesting, about the underpinning research for the case studies, for the impact assessments. And it was, well, does all of these things that you cite have to be 2-star rated publications? Well, the answer is surely that it's important that they are assessed and that there is some question resolved about whether this is actually good enough, because if you're doing your impact work on something that is not actually very good research, it's clearly misleading and shouldn't be encouraged. One of the things that I found quite interesting was that the emergence of some of the myths or beliefs that people hold out quite strongly. So the guidance itself says that where something is published is not the relevant question to answer. So, and the requirements for the RAE perhaps more are emphasizing the quality of the research according to the criteria that is being used, by saying that we're interested in the 3 things that are in your head about significance, originality, and rigor. So deciding that, fixating on whether it's a top journal that you've got your paper in may be an indicator that the paper is actually good in those respects from the point of view of the RAE, but it's probably more important to individuals in terms of how their academic work is perceived by the university. And I think that it's easy to actually forget that when people are engaging these things, these exercises, that what's also going on is that people are thinking about what impact is that going to have on me and my career? Will it enhance it or not? Am I being advised quite specifically you should only publish in certain journals? Well, that's certainly not the conclusion that should be drawn if we look at the guidelines about what people should do, just focus on the nature of the item considered as by itself. The other conflict that I noted was that there is a difference between the ways in which people are thinking about such items as, what about literature reviews, in the particular area? And there were 2 people who insisted that they had read in the guidance for the previous iteration, which was to say that literature reviews that weren't systemic reviews would not be considered. Well, my colleague kindly checked that because I thought it was highly unlikely that that was actually said. And indeed, actually, what it says in the previous guidance was not that, but it had become a belief that this was how it is. And so this business about how ideas grow up that are misinterpretations of what we put in the guidelines, I think is one that we need to keep in mind as we kind of go through this sort of thing. Because just because something's written in the guidelines doesn't mean to say, A, that people have read it, or B, that people understand it, or understand it in the way that it was originally intended. I've got another sort of general point in which I've extracted from the original questions, and that really was an emphasis on the fact that it was the university and the University of Assessment, the unit of assessment that's actually being assessed, not the individuals. But when you think about it in terms of implications, that people are being pressed to do one kind of thing. To some extent, it might include even major things like restructuring departments in order to enhance the chance of their unit and department getting a high rating. Yeah? And that seems to be a pretty drastic way of actually tackling things, and again, leaving people out of it. And these are sort of my concerns. But again, lots of the answers are actually embedded in the guidelines about how about things that people were asking clarifications for. So the multiple submissions, the extent to which originality was actually demonstrated, and what would happen if you did this or did that or the other. Those are the technical things, but I think we need, as I say, we keep saying that we need to bear in mind the impact that this is having on people who are involved in it, and what is motivating the universities as organisations to push people in a particular direction, often because they've actually got false beliefs about what the exercise is trying to achieve. So I've got 20 seconds, and I'll finish in time. Thank you. Okay.
Well timed, John. Thank you very much. And finally, Group 4, Humanities, Performing Arts and Education. Maria, please.
Yeah, thanks. And can I reiterate thanks to all of you who were in the room with us and those who participated online, because those questions were also really helpful, and to our UGC colleagues for answering many of the operational and technical questions. It really did feel like a collective effort. Our discussion was very much around outputs, impact and environment, with probably outputs taking the longest amount of time. And I won't go over certain points because John, Paola and Bernard have already, there's lots of points of convergence actually in information they've shared. There was a number of questions around what it means to be publicly shared, what it means to be accessible, and can we provide some clearer guidance on what can be counted as publicly accessible or not, if it's on an institutional repository, preprint, etc. So certainly UGC can look into that. There was also some discussion around new creative forms, so creative practice, and really we sought to reassure those in the room that it doesn't matter what type of output you present, as long as there is a really clear research imperative and that research is embedded in the output. And we really want to reassure you that's absolutely the case, and we'll look at doing that in our panel guidance, especially a panel like KPAD, where there will be outputs in non-traditional forms. There was also a question around commissioned research, so indications of how the research quality might be evidenced when you don't have a mechanism of peer review. Long discussion around the 100-word description, and we took a poll. We invited participation. So there was a lot of people initially thinking it should be optional, and then beginning to realize that optional means that universities will likely see it as a requirement. So by the end of the discussion, most people wanted it scrapped. Yes. So that was the kind of conclusion. And it shows that people can be swayed and change their minds when they understand what optional might actually mean. And a reassurance that we will keep the 300 words around artistic practice, where you can articulate the research imperative, the process, and the findings, to ensure that where it's not evident in the output itself, that information can help with identifying the research imperative. There was also some discussion around which panel is best for your submission, and whether whether institutions can make that decision in association with people, whether people should be able to discuss, or researchers, where they go, and obviously we hope that will be a collaborative discussion, and also about outputs, whether there's panels, whether if an output doesn't have the expertise within the panel, whether we'll have research assessors, whether we can cross-refer to other panels. And there was a real reassurance that we will use whatever mechanism necessary to ensure that we can provide robust assessment. There was a discussion as to a panel like the Humanities panel where there's a huge range of outputs submitted. Again, whether there can be complete coverage, there can never be complete coverage. But as I said, we will look at whatever mechanism we need to be able to ensure that we're able to assess in a robust manner. Also a question around working methods in terms of if a panel member doesn't agree with the positionality or doesn't agree with the argument, can they still be able to assess the originality, significance and rigor? And so perhaps we need to provide some guidance on personal bias of the reviewers, that we try and look as objectively as possible at the output itself. So those were the kind of main issues around outputs. We were also asked to lay out, if possible, a clear definition of international excellence and international standing, and to reassure that bodies of work or a creative output where there's multiple dissemination points won't be disadvantaged, or if there's a lot of material, it won't tire the assessors. And we assured, provide the material that you need to provide to ensure that we can make a robust judgment on the research quality. We then moved to discuss impact, and there was some discussion on whether there could be a joint submission by two institutions. There was also a discussion on reach, that it wasn't about just simply providing the numerical data, but the importance of evidencing what had changed, what difference had happened as a result of the research. And also a discussion around the balance between qualitative and quantitative evidence. You provide the evidence you need to be able to show what's changed. It's not just about the numbers. Therefore. And there was a discussion also about underpinning research, and we sought to reassure those that there wasn't a correlation between the quality of the research and the score of the case study. It's simply a threshold judgment on the 2-star. We don't look at it again. There was also a discussion on continuing case studies. There is some guidance on that. Maybe we need to be clearer about the body of underpinning research being the same, but the impact having progressed into new stages or a new range of beneficiaries or new types of impact types. And then we moved to discuss environment, there was some questions around whether, the relationship between the UOAs and the institutional statement. The institutional statement is really in a dialogue with the UOA environment statement. And while the institutional statement isn't assessed, it's really useful if they're in conversation with each other, and it doesn't look like they're two, completely different, existing in two completely different hemispheres. There was also some questions around size of unit, and we sought to again reassure that it's not about how many people or how much money you have, but it's about what you do with it, and that aligns very much with what Bernard was talking about, and the importance of really showing excellence on its own terms, whatever the size and scale of the unit. We also talked about consultancy income, and again providing some clarity on where consultancy income, which is very important to certain units, where that can be positioned. And there was a general sense from the group that they really wanted us to be clear about the weightings of the different sections in the environment template, to be really transparent on what the different weightings are, so that they know what they're being scored against. There was also a discussion on ethics and integrity. What does it mean? What does it constitute? And the general view that we can have, it's important about trust in research, and that research conducted with integrity is able to assure that it is trustworthy in as far as possible, and rigorous and robust. So it's about the reason that there is this focus on integrity and ethics is about ensuring, open promotion of open research, so it's shared with as many communities as possible, reproducibility where that's relevant, and we know that's different in the arts and humanities, but also ensuring that we're accountable for the research we do, and we're sharing it as widely as possible and showing the benefits of it. And with 13 seconds to go, I end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our 4 facilitators. Please keep in mind that all of us, the external people, flew in, so that by this time of the day there's a jet lag effect. So I think we're doing pretty well. Thank you very much. David, did you want to add anything?
Yes, if I could, Chris. In the session I was in, but also elsewhere, it would seem there's the continued reference to journal impact factor. Can I refer everybody in the room to the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which clearly indicates that journal impact factor is an illegitimate way of assessing the value of research output. Many universities have signed up to San Francisco Declaration Research Assessment, and I was just trying to check how many in Hong Kong have done so. But it might be interesting to see if your institution has signed up to it, in which case the careers development and promotions and so forth processes should be blind to JIF, Journal Impact Factor, and should follow DORA, that it's the quality of the work, irrespective of where it's published, is the key thing. And it's a really important cultural change that needs to happen within the HE sector to recognize it's the not where, but what is published.
Thank you, David. That's very clear and very good advice, I think. If you'd allow me, I'd like to make a few sort of general overall wrap-up comments. I had the pleasure of drifting from one group to the other, so I sat in on each of the 4 groups for a time. And I really felt there was a lively and interactive discussion and a valuable feedback, which is what we were after. This is what we're trying to be responsive to the mood, so to speak, of the academics, and not just to clear up the details, which we try and do to the best of our ability, but to understand what, if anything, is the academic concerns about the entire exercise and to be responsive to those. The 4 groups, the facilitators generally structured the discussion, as you heard, in the 3 categories: research outputs, research impact, research environment, and you've heard their feedback. My own impression is that, excuse me, most of the questions were from experienced people who'd done at least one round of this kind of exercise, and this time they were probing, the questions were probing what's new. What is different this time from what was the case last time, so that we seem to have moved on a bit. The questions that came up, what, is it already 5 years ago? Last time, that seems to have settled down now. But for example, within the context of the research outputs, one topic that was raised in, I think, more than one group was the increasing emphasis on interdisciplinarity and the acknowledged sort of procedural difficulty of how to deal with interdisciplinarity, because we all want to see more of it, but we need to have some sound mechanisms for assessing it. And I just wanted to mention we are going to have a special workshop on this very topic, which will be facilitated and chaired by Professor Arno de Meyer on Wednesday. So that topic, the feedback from these meetings on interdisciplinarity, will be raised in that workshop on Wednesday. So that's an example of an evolving topic. In impact, of course, this is the first time we are going to have continued impact case studies, because last time was the first time we had impact at all. So this is the first time the possibility of continued impact case studies comes up. And there were quite a few questions, I think, about what actually counts as a continuation and when is it new and when is it not new and so on, all very valuable. And within environment, we have David, Professor Price here is the sort of go-to person on research culture, which difficult to define, isn't it, research culture? Difficult to put down in words or in a paragraph, but in a sense we all have a sense of what a sound, valuable, vital research culture actually means, and we're just trying to tease that out in terms of different indicators. So again, the questions on that, when the issues of research ethics, for example, you've just heard about DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, All of those kind of things crop up in a way now that they didn't last time. So it's a valuable exercise for us to hear your views on this matter. Let me make a few very general overall comments. The first one I'd like to emphasize is that, remember, all of this is a peer review exercise. This is not an algorithmic tick box kind of exercise. We have gone to great lengths to constitute the panels, the 13 disciplinary panels. We have gone to great lengths to recruit international experts, and here you have their representatives. The panels are going to be constituted. The assessors, if you like, will be professors and academics like yourselves. So all the issues that you raise will be familiar to these assessors. They've been there and done that in as much as you have been there and done that. And that is how we as academics, that's how we operate. It's essentially we value the assessment of our work by our peers. And that's the driving force of this exercise. And what that means is, this repeats again a point that raised earlier, but I think is worth repeating, is the assessment is done by experts who are actually going to read and assess those submissions on their own merit. So if you think about each eligible academic submits up to 4 research outputs, you're looking at a few thousands of research outputs. Last time it was about 16,000 research outputs. But we have about 400 assessors. And the panels will be able to judge which research outputs get judged in which panel by which assessors and so on, so that you get, as it were, a fair assessment by somebody who is knowledgeable in that particular field. So it's not a quantitative, just look at impact factors kind of exercise. It's a human peer review judgment, and that is the basis of the exercise. The second general comment I want to make is we acknowledge, of course, and it was shown in the different discussions in the groups that I attended, that there are disciplinary differences. We're all very comfortable with that. And this is why we have these 13 panels and the 40 units of assessment and the different kind of reviewers and assessors and so on. So for example, just to mention one instance, in one panel I heard it argued that publishing a book and submitting a book as a research output is, in that particular panel, it's a very valuable thing to do, because that's part of what your rite of passage to become, as it were, a leading academic, is to write a book, a research book. Whereas in another panel, books tend to be kind of edited contributions rather than original research contributions. So in the other panel, it is not so crucial. So that's an example of the disciplinary differences that we take into account, and there will be others. And my final point, the general point, is, again, it's at sort of really top level. This is essentially an exercise in judging the research quality of the university, your university, the 8 universities in Hong Kong, public universities. And we break it down to unit level just to get a grip on the exercise, so that we are judging the quality, the research quality of these 40 units. We are not in the business of judging the individual per se in order to play some role in university judgments about, career development and that kind of thing. So if anybody should be nervous, it should be your university president rather than yourself. In the end, what is published as the outcome of this exercise is a research profile. And I think if you've seen the documents, you would have seen a picture of what that profile looks like. You get a rating in terms, the unit at your university gets a rating in terms of the research outputs, it gets a rating in terms of the research impact, it gets a rating in terms of the research environment, and those are compiled into a profile, and those profiled, the confidential data is transmitted back to your university, and we publish the overall picture, the research profile of the 8 universities, and that gives the academics, the university, the public, the government, gives us an idea of the quality of research in Hong Kong, which is what we are trying to do. So those are my sort of overall wrap-up comments. I will stop there just by saying thank you once again for staying the course and helping us to clarify and helping us to finalize these documents. In terms of process, just to repeat, we hope to wrap this up by September, that the final 2 official documents, the general panel guidelines and the panel-specific guidelines, will be published on the UGC website by September. And all the questions you raised, which have been, you would have seen there was a member of the Secretariat taking copious notes in your breakout session. All of these questions go into a Q&A document, of which we have a draft because we know what was raised last time. And that document too will be fed back to the university so that your specific questions should be in that document with a carefully considered answer, hopefully all going well by September. So thank you again. I will stop there. I'll ask Professor Tong if he has any comments to wrap up, and then we're going to be closed this afternoon session by Professor Tang. Tim.
Well, thank you, Chris. I really don't have much comments to add, except to point out that I sat in 3 of the 4 breakout sessions. I wasn't quite as capable as Chris, who managed to sit in all 4 of the breakout groups. But in the 3 groups that I sat in, I really found that there was a lively exchange. Questions raised were very relevant to the exercise that we are dealing with. So I just found today's forum to be very useful. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for coming and your contributions, and also thank the conveners and the co-conveners for their contributions as well. So I want to wish you all good luck, and I look forward to be receiving the materials from you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. James, you are going to close our session today.
Thank you, Chris. I don't think I really have anything to add, apart from really thanking everyone. As this forum comes to a close, obviously, first of all, I would like to, on behalf of the UGC, express our sincere gratitude to all the valuable and thoughtful comments that you have shared with us. Our facilitators have made a very good summary of all these ideas, and I think Chris just now shared some of the ideas that have guided us as we think about how we approach the RAE at this time. And what you've shared, I think, will add to the further deliberations as we try to finalize the panel-specific guidelines for RAE 2026. I would also like to extend our deepest appreciation to the Hong Kong Polytechnic University for graciously providing the venues for this important event. We are grateful to our dedicated colleagues from PolyU whose support has ensured the smooth running of today's forum. So thank you very much, PolyU's colleagues. We actually would still have to depend on our colleagues from PolyU to continue providing support to us for our wrap-up meetings on Wednesday. So thank you, truly.
Thank you, Professor Tang. Before we go, may I invite the professors on the stage to join us at the floor so we can take a few group photos from the above.